At the start of the year, all eyes were on whether Florida Governor Ron DeSantis was going to throw his hat in the ring for the 2024 presidential election. His landslide victory at last year's November midterm elections put him front and centre for Americans who were questioning, if not Donald Trump, then who? For months, it was speculated whether Ron DeSantis would capitalise on his newfound national popularity by committing to a presidential run. But after having only just won 4 more years as Florida governor, many thought he would leave it in the hands of his former boss, Donald Trump. That is until May this year, when Ron DeSantis finally announced he was running as a Republican candidate.
Our border is a disaster. Crime infests our cities. The federal government makes it harder for families to make ends meet, and the president flounders. But decline is a choice. Success is attainable, and freedom is worth fighting for. Righting the ship requires restoring sanity to our society, normalcy to our communities, and integrity to our institutions.
The general reaction to the news at the time, I believe, was that he waited too long. Ron DeSantis had a lot of momentum coming out of the November 2022 election cycle. He was really one of the 2 Republican stars of the night and an otherwise lackluster night. And I think people were expecting him to seize that momentum early on. And by waiting until May, I think that he caused some concern and let some people down and lost a lot of momentum.
The way in which Ron DeSantis announced his presidential run was unprecedented. It was meant to be this big live show on Twitter in the company of Elon Musk, but it came with its own difficulties.
All right, sorry about that. We've got so many people here that I think we are kind of melting the servers.
So I think we're back online here. Great. All right. Well, it's certainly an incredible honor to have Governor DeSantis make this stark announcement.
Are you there? Can you hear us? I think you broke.
I'm here.
I know. I think you broke the internet there. We had over 500,000 people in one Twitter space, and it was growing by like 50,000 a minute. So, congrats on breaking the internet.
I think it was terribly damaging, and I think that we're seeing the effects of that now because the lead up to that announcement was that this was going to be the biggest thing that you've ever seen. That rather than underselling their expectations, they overset the expectations. And so people were expecting to see the candidate with all the momentum have this unprecedentedly big announcement, and it fell completely flat. And people started saying, well, this is sort of a metaphor of the DeSantis campaign, and it's kind of proving itself to be the case. So he missed his big windows to raise money. He missed his big window to introduce himself.
Before Ron DeSantis announced his run, he was considered the clear favourite to take on the former president. In fact, his polling was trailing incredibly close to Donald Trump. However, who would have known following Ron DeSantis' announcement that he would actually end up vying for second place with businessman Vivek Ramaswamy?
You have to give Vivek a lot of credit. Vivek is a younger, more energetic guy, and Ron DeSantis is also fairly young. But the contrast in personality has been pretty stark. Vivek is very energetic. He seized a lot of early ideas that are very popular with conservatives. Really taking this ESG movement on to start reducing a lot of the federal bureaucracy. I mean, kind of bigger statements to galvanize conservatives. And with Ron DeSantis, he just really didn't have that. There was not the personal charisma that Vivek was showing early on, that confidence that he could win the more bold policy initiatives. And so Vivek, I think, captured a lot of that young enthusiasm that I think Ron DeSantis was really banking on. And Vivek's taken a lot of wind out of Ron DeSantis' sails, I think, very early on. That just bolstered that narrative that DeSantis really wasn't the heir apparent, that other people had good claims to being the challenger.
In early 2023, the only 2 viable Republican options to take on Joe Biden were considered to be Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. Governor DeSantis' approach to leading Florida through the coronavirus pandemic helped him gain the popularity of Republicans around the country. Polling had the 2 neck and neck, but a lot has changed since then.
So when he came out of winning the Florida election by a landslide, he was within single digits of Trump. It was essentially about a 40-ish to 30-ish range. So he was down 9 points in the 538 polls. By March, he was down twice as much as that. He was down 16 points because he still hadn't announced. Trump got indicted. That lead doubled. It was 50 to 25. Now that lead is 57 to 14. I mean, his Ron DeSantis' support has over halved since that Florida election. He really missed his window of momentum to seize the leadership.
In order to run a successful presidential campaign, candidates need financial backing. They rely on donors to fund them in order to stay in the race and take it to the finish line. According to Axios, Ron DeSantis' campaign has over $12 million cash in hand. He has been spending big this quarter, splashing out $11 million already ahead of January's Iowa caucus. But this comes at a time when the Republican candidate has already lost a lot of donor support, prompting the question of whether he can keep up.
It really looks like you're dying a very slow death. What it looks like is someone that has, if you look at presidential donations, is basically bets on who is going to be in power at the end because you're trying to get influence. What you're watching is that people are losing confidence in his campaign. And those early advisors, those early donors, are the people that are sending the signal to the media which candidate has, like the juice and which candidate doesn't. So that starts to shape some coverage. And then whenever the coverage and the money isn't there, it starts to shape that you're not doing as much with your campaign. And it just sort of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that your candidacy really isn't going anywhere, that the donors are right all along. So when the price of a Ron DeSantis fundraiser was essentially cut in half from early on, in his campaign to midsummer, it's basically, we started joking that it was DeSantis at a discount. But that narrative is what's actually started to take hold, that whatever we thought he was, he's about half of that. And it's just an impossible narrative to overcome.
The role of the media has played a part in Ron DeSantis' rise and fall on the presidential stage. He has constantly been pinned against Donald Trump as the other Republican candidate. While the former president was quick to jump on the bandwagon of publicly shaming DeSantis, referring to him as Ron DeSanctimonious, can the Florida governor dish it out too? The problem is, when Ron DeSantis chooses to sink to Trump's level, he will be rudely met with the wrath of Team MAGA.
Trump has always built an online army. But DeSantis had his actual staff taking on the Trump online army rather than Trump, who has these sort of outsiders with big platforms and not much, political insight. And so what it started looking like was that DeSantis was trying to be mega Trump in that sense by really brutalizing people. But what it came off as was just insincere and unlikable. He turned away a lot of people that thought that they were getting, like Trump's policies without the Trump baggage. And so what it's done is it's made his campaign look petty, like they're the little dog trying to pick a fight with the big dog. And, it's just, unfortunately, it's par for the course with the way that this campaign has been going for him, that he's just constantly been trying to imitate the original and looking like an inferior copy.
And Trump may be public enemy number one to some, but at least he has undying loyalty from his voters.
Whenever you're looking at Trump, he's getting attacked from one position, but there's a lot of support coming from the right, and there's a lot of favorable publicity. With DeSantis, he's being squeezed on both sides. The left doesn't like him at all for, basically the reasons that he was so successful as governor of Florida. The right doesn't particularly like him because they're taking on Trump. And so, all of this earned media, when it's all negative, just goes to paint a negative picture. And that's really what's happening here, is that there's no positive momentum behind any of his coverage.
Even with 4 indictments looming over Donald Trump's head, his loyal base hasn't shifted onto Ron DeSantis as their replacement.
Donald Trump for so long has been painting the picture of himself as the victim of the conspiracy. And that goes back to before the election. He has always tried to take on the world is against me persona. And when you're a Trump supporter and that's sort of how you've adopted your worldview of him, that, Donald Trump is fighting for me against all odds. He used to have these memes that he was the person holding back the storm. So what people are conditioned to see is that all these indictments are just proof positive that he is the greatest threat to the uniparty, that he is the greatest threat to liberal interests.
If Ron DeSantis' trajectory continues to fall, other Republican candidates will move up into second place to face off against Donald Trump. The question begs, who could that be?
Nikki Haley's getting a lot of traction. Nikki Haley's getting a lot of traction for the best possible reasons, which is she has a lot of substance. I hear from people that love Trump that will say to me, I really like Nikki Haley. She's such a clear communicator. I know what she stands for. She has that foreign policy experience. I just know so many people that are taking a serious look at Nikki Haley and coming away favorably impressed. That does not mean that they would move off of Trump to Nikki Haley, but that does mean that they really like her. But if you're a Ron DeSantis person looking for the strongest non-Trump candidate, you might be inclined towards Nikki Haley. I mean, she is saying a lot of tough conservative things with a lot of authority, communicating them very clearly. So I would expect to see her doing well.
Since May, when Ron DeSantis announced his presidency, there has been a series of stumbles and slowdowns that have caused many to question whether he will make it to the finish line. Having to juggle the stress of leading Florida as governor and campaigning for a presidential election, has Ron DeSantis crumbled under the pressure and self-destructed?
I think that is fair to say. There have just been a lot of strategic mistakes early on, and these are unforced errors by the campaign. The long delay to announce, the early announcements of staff shakeups that made it seem like they really weren't that clear about what they were saying and who they were saying it to. All of these are unforced errors. That really early comment that they were all in on Iowa rather than running the national campaign to the end. Every single one of these was an unforced error that was not brought upon by pressure from another candidate, but by bad strategic decisions made by DeSantis and his team of advisors. And he has had a lot of difficulty trying to dig out from under those because his team's unforced errors essentially set the narrative about him before he got to shape the narrative about himself and his own campaign.